introduce our moderator. That's Bill Haskins, Senior Analyst, Unified Communications of Wainhouse Research. I'll hand it over to Bill, and he can go ahead and introduce our other speakers.
Sounds great. You guys hear me okay? I don't have as quite a distinguished voice as our him, and you can just give the rest of the presentation. Sounded awesome. You wouldn't want it. Yes, so we've got the first part of this correct. I am Bill Haskins. I am Senior Analyst with Wainhouse Research, focused on unified communications. We have two experts here. I think the quick housekeeping, this is the right size room for us to have a dialogue. You have the benefit of two of the leaders inside the UCaaS industry here. Louis Hayner, Executive Vice President and Chief Sales Officer over at Altiva, and Jeff Savage, Vice President of Sales over at Telesphere. Just to be very clear, some of the top experts inside the UCaaS industry. Analyst. Hard questions, easy questions. Difficult things, fisticuffs, they'll handle it. All right, so yeah, you've got an analyst also in the room here. That's me. That means that you're going to have to hear me talk for at least 10 minutes. It's not just the sound of my own voice. You've heard I like Craig's voice better. It is that we wanted to spend the first 10 minutes or so kind of warming up the conversation. Let's talk about UCaaS. The goal of this dialogue is for you guys to walk out of here with another layer of knowledge around UC as a service from a product offer standpoint, what that means from an opportunity standpoint for you, what it means from a challenge standpoint for you. Before we get to the as a service part, there's a whole bunch of jokes there if you're following along the as a service conversation. Before we get to as a service, let's start with the definition. I'll tell you, I've been giving this discussion in one form or another for well over 5 years, focusing on unified communications. I still start these discussions with a definition. We thought it made a lot of sense to kind of level set. UC is one of those terms that are very similar to telepresence. Depending on who you talk to, it can mean anything and nothing. It's because there are various angles of sales that people are going to manipulate some of these terms to try and make sense. I focus on the user when I talk about unified communications. What we're talking about is a new way to communicate. It's an application-driven way to communicate that should allow your workforce to gain productivity savings by making it easier to communicate. It's a very simple premise. You'll see a little more complicated to implement. It starts at a standard client. You have to have a magnet in order to unify communications, right? This is your center point. There's lots of other devices that can come with this, but there has to be a starting point of a client. First foundational experience, contacts. You need to be able to add contacts to this client. Ideally, that's based on directory integration, but it could be manual. But also, as or more importantly, I need presence for those clients. I need to see somebody available, somebody busy. Are they away from their desk? It's a core foundational component here to be a better communicator, easier communicator. And then there are some specific communication modalities. You can say this later in the show sometime when your buddies, we found out about modalities. Communication modalities, different types of communication that you're going to unify. Instant messaging, one of the foundational points of this experience. Audio, video, the ability to share content. These are really the core components that you're going to unify into this UC experience. And then we add conferencing, not just one-to-one communications here, but the ability to pull multiple people into a collaboration event across these modalities. All right. Again, there are, as I work with enterprises who are trying to create ROI models or business cases around unified communications, you have hard savings that come with this for the enterprise. I'm going from a TDM experience, I'm killing circuits, going VoIP in my new UC frame, I'm trying to save costs, etc. From our standpoint, the sweet spot really is the productivity conversation though. Much harder to quantify, but the theory is you do this well, you have the ability to communicate based on somebody's availability. You remove the ping pong match of voicemail, right? You communicate right the first time. You start at an IM and you can say, hey, are you able to talk to me? You escalate that with a click up into audio, and now you've saved time that used to be, let me go to the phone book, let me find out if Bill's available, let me call him, let me leave him a voicemail, etc. So we're talking about fluid communications. Now there's a whole bunch of cool stuff that you can do once you establish this experience. You can take this and you can take the application and embed it in the workflow, and you can enable your communications workflow business process. Things that you should do, things that you can apply once you have an application-driven experience. But that's not the core of what we're talking about. For UC, for a solution to qualify as UC, it has to include those components. All right, now how do you deploy this? There are, same as other enterprise IT services, email or et cetera, there are different deployment models that that are standard here. You can put a box on premise, manage it yourself, Mr. and Mrs. Enterprise. You can put it in a provider's cloud. This is one of those terms where you can get really fuzzy on, well, is it my cloud, your cloud, et cetera. From our side, we try and make it really cut and dry. For something to be UC as a service, you have the UC experience, but then it has to be hosted in someone else's data center. You're trusting, you're gaining access to an external data center, not on premise. That side is the UCaaS model. Now there's different ways that you can gain access to that third party's data center. You can create a private MPLS, QoS-enabled connection, or you can go over the internet and have a public connection. Still, the goal here is you have a expert, you have a service provider who's put these bits into their cloud, under their control, and are providing them in a hosted model. And of course, those two are blending as well. Lots of hybrid conversation out there, lots of enterprises who have a certain number of seats on their premises, but they know that there's some advantages to working with a service provider. So they put some of those in a UCaaS model, and then they tie the two together, federate or integrate.